5th, 2009 meeting of the Salina City Planning Commission to order. Dean, how about the agenda? Any adjustments we need to make?
Should be no adjustments in the items. They should occur in the order in which they appear on the agenda.
Very well. First item, approval of summary minutes of the April 21st, 2009 meeting. Any comments or about a motion to approve?
Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion that we approve the minutes from the April 21st meeting, please.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
So be it. Item number 2, this is a continuation of a public hearing on application number CU09-1 filed by Gerald Squires, doing business as BFR Metals, requesting approval of a conditional use permit. I'm not going to read all that. It's addressed at 1500 West State Street, and this is continued from the April 21st meeting. Dean, staff report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have been working with this property and the planning staff since about March of 2007, and the primary things that we have been working on, in addition to an actual conditional use permit application, was getting submittal of a proposed screening or fencing or planning plan for what we're referring to as the expansion area, which is what you're looking at today, getting a design and location pinned down for proposed gated access along Cherry Street, getting a plan in place satisfactory to the fire department for a fire lane access drive through the expansion area to all the proposed gates, and then clarifying the status of Cherry Street where an access gate is proposed. We have platted right-of-way for Cherry Street, but the area north of the cabinet shop has not been considered an opened public street. It's been considered unimproved and not open to traffic. So if it were used for vehicle access into and out of this site, even on an irregular basis, there'd probably have to be some improvements made to that roadway surface. This may just be added gravel, but that would need to be worked out with the Public Works Department. We think most of those items have been addressed to the best of the applicant's ability. There were 2 items that were lingering and addressed and carried over from the last meeting. One of those related to a fence or wall that was being proposed along Cherry Street that was over 8 feet in height. Any fence or wall that is over 6 feet in height does require the issuance of a building permit or fence permit. That application has now been filed, and the review of that is complete, and the permit to complete construction of that wall is ready to be issued. The other aspect that was allowed for the tabling was the issue of planting trees along State Street. That's the before picture. This is the current picture. We had discussed earlier perhaps some spacing or distribution farther to the west, but apparently with the building, the access, the compaction, this is the space available for having landscape plantings between the outside wall and a public street. So those are the efforts of the applicant to comply with those 2 items. I believe, John, those are cedar trees?
Yes, they are.
Okay, so they are evergreen cedar trees that have been planted. That their focus there is the southeast corner of the site adjacent to State Street. So those were the 2 items related to the site plan that resulted in a motion to have this application continued to this meeting. I guess if you could go to the site plan, John, we'll walk through that. just to refresh, this line extended up to here is the site currently licensed and zoned to operate an auto salvage yard. Everything to the east over here is what is being discussed in terms of this particular application. What the applicant has done is has planted trees in this location, has worked on getting an all-weather access road to this point, and will continue that over to this gate. This area here represents the area of Cherry Street that is not really gravel at this point in time. The roadway more or less ends here, so there'd have to be some improvement of this surface here. This wall would be completed and be concrete block. This would be concrete block here with a cattle panel gate here with mesh screening, and a metal fence would continue here, and join up with this right here, and that would be the extent of that. The other question that's been discussed before was the need for any screening along the north, and I believe you do have some photos down in that area.
These are photos from Old Highway 40. In this case, looking back over the tracks to the south in the general direction of BFR property. There are several photos here.
Yeah, the BFR property is actually to the far left side, and some of what you're looking at there is other properties. But this would be the BFR property there. So the question for that needs to be addressed is whether there's a need for any additional screening or buffering along that north side, or whether the combination of the existing trees and the elevated rail bed there provides sufficient view obscuring screening. So I think those are the remaining items. Mr. Stack is here to address any questions you have about the status or improvement of Cherry Street and any ideas he might have, and we'd be open to any questions that you have. We believe if the Planning Commission is to a point of addressing this application, that we believe any approval should be subject to the standards that are in Section 42-366-5 of the I-2 district regulations, and if there are specific conditions you have related to screening or site access or other issues, those would be appropriate as well. But I think that Mr. Stacker, I'd be available for questions.
Okay, thank you, Dean. Any questions of staff?
Dean, now with the planting of the trees, does that bring the existing site into compliance with the statutes?
Yes, with the all-weather access road interior to the site and the existing screening fence that's there, the Chapter 33 code requires a fence, doesn't specify what type of fence, and then requires that evergreen trees be planted outside of that fence, and that under the new code it's an either-or proposition, that if you have a solid fence of the right height, you don't need to double that up with plantings. But along State Street, that dates back to March of 2007, that was a requirement for them to renew the license at this location, and so that with the addition of those trees and the fencing that's there and the all-weather access drive on the interior, the existing site is pretty well into conformance. The only difference, again, we would point out, and we discussed before, is this fence right here in 2007, by all rights, should have just continued straight north up along the east boundary of that site. And that was not done, and we didn't require it to be done because the question of whether they could expand to the east had not been finalized. So
Can you address the height of that existing fence on that north-south line there? Is that 6 foot then?
it is 6 foot, and that meets the requirements in place in Chapter 33. It does not meet the requirements that were adopted for future new salvage yards, which has an 8-foot minimum requirement.
So at the time they put it up, 6
At
foot?
the time they put it up, it complied.
Okay.
What they didn't do and what they had before was that when you put a fence on the property line and in that close proximity to the building, there's no place for trees on the outside of the fence, so except to put them on your neighbor's property. So that was the only part that was done, but it was determined and agreed to that the point of emphasis would be State Street, and that's where the trees needed to go, and the fence with the buildings there to the east, we had sufficient screening there.
Dean, what's the required fence height of additions to an existing salvage yard, though, per the regulations?
I don't, if you were starting from scratch, it would be 8 feet.
And is that not what we're approving here, is he's adding on to his salvage yard? Would that fence, the proposed fence additions, wouldn't they need to be 8 feet?
I think for the additions to the existing fence, there is some latitude there to exercise judgment. On Cherry Street, where there is nothing, that has to be 8 feet, and that's what he's doing. What the alternative to that is to take, and I'm not sure where we're at, John, so maybe a site plan would be better than this.
Sure.
This piece right here ends right here. You, as a commission, can say, this is brand new fence here, and that for the expansion area, and that needs to be 8 feet tall, because that fence isn't built yet. The counter to that is that there's an existing established 6-foot fence that was put up before this part of the zoning ordinance was adopted, and this remainder is just a continuation of that metal fence. But that is a decision for the commission to make, that either that 6-foot fence that's metal can be continued all the way over to the wall at Cherry Street, or you can say that the remainder, this section here that's not put up yet, has to be 8 feet tall. If we were starting with a blank slate out there completely, it would need to be 8 feet tall.
But the block fence now, just recently put up along on Cherry Street, is 8 feet.
Yes, it's going to be 8 feet tall, and that will comply with that requirement. Part of that, at least the rationale at the time, was that there was concerns about a 5 or 6 foot fence and then stacking of material or cars going above that, and so the thought was if you had 8 foot, you would obscure more of the view, and you'd be less likely to have material stacked above that was protruding over the fence.
On your plan, you show an area where gravel must be added to Cherry Street. Who's responsible for that? Is that the city's responsibility, or?
I think there is probably some leeway either way, but I think by past practice and precedent, that has generally been the responsibility of the city to bring that up to a standard where people can drive on it. But Mr. Stack's been out to look at it, and he'll have an opinion on what might need to be done there.
Yeah, we just went and looked at some areas around there and existing gravel roads, and arguably there is some gravel partially on Cherry, but we just have to make sure we gravelled it further to the north. And that's not uncommon in the area, so that's all that we would require at this point. It'd be hard to pave it and hard to make anybody pay for paving, I guess, especially since there's no precedent or no policy really to require them to do that.
And the main reason for that is to provide a surface for fire trucks?
Correct. Yeah, it's pretty, there's just not anything north of the cabinet shop. So it's pretty much mud. So if on a muddy day, rainy day, it would be hard to access by anybody. So we'd have to make sure there's some kind of a usable surface that's all weather, that what Dean talked about it, I guess, an all weather surface that holds up trucks and emergency access for whatever situation.
For the internal road, once you're into the site, past the gate, do you have standards for that kind of road that the applicant must conform to support, for example, a fire truck?
Fire department has some standards that say that base in there, they would inspect it and determine whether it would support the weight of a fire truck. And that is the fire department standard, that it has to have sufficient depth and base to it that would support the weight of a fire truck.
Correct. Yeah, we don't have, for the private party or the private portion of this, we don't have any standards, but the fire department does.
Fire department does, okay. Any further questions of staff?
Yeah, I still have a couple, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
But I'm still just not clear on the 8-foot fence requirement. I know the purpose of an 8-foot fence, and I know that years ago salvage yards underwent some revisions to improve the appearance from roads. But we have a 6-foot fence in existence that was on property that was not approved previously for salvage yard use. Then we're saying we're going to accept that fence into this approval process, what we're saying now. Then we've got 2 additional fences that need to be built yet, and are we saying they don't have to be 8 foot either, yet the regulations, as you pointed them out in the document, says that screening fences shall be 8 foot high. So I guess what I'm asking is, as we approve this, if we approve this, then we're making an exception for the fence height that's already there, as well as for new fence heights except for the block fence along Cherry Street. Are we also making an exception for the berm or screening that's required on the north side, which is required to also be 8 foot according to what you sent us in the packet?
Well, that I believe is an open question on, there's 2 ways to look at that fence. One way is to look at it as a new fence. One of it is to view it as an extension of the existing 6-foot metal fence. I think what Mr. Squires would tell you, and which is probably true, is if we hadn't had an alley right here, that this was a city-owned public alley, this fence probably would have been put up already. But we made the fence stop there at the time because it couldn't stop, it couldn't cross the alley, and then that property on Cherry was acquired a little bit later. But part of this is just a matter of practicality.
But when that fence was put up as a 6-foot fence,
Yes.
was it put up legally at that time?
The fence is legal
So
as a 6-foot fence. It wasn't even required at the time.
Okay.
It was a voluntarily put up fence. What was not legal, and what we tried to prevent from happening and happened anyway, is this fence. This fence was supposed to be put
Right.
up like this.
Okay.
That's where the fence was supposed to go.
So it was permitted to go north-south instead of,
What we were
East-west.
told in March of 2007 was that they wanted to expand the salvage yard to the east. And they did not, and it didn't make sense to us to have them put up a fence right here and then tear it out again if they were permitted to expand. What we didn't know in March 2007 was that it would take us from March 2007 to May 2009 to get here. But but now we're here. That fence has been out there since, as I said, I can recall it yesterday, like it was yesterday, that telling Mr. Bohm over the phone, please don't put that fence up. Come into the office, let's get out a map and figure out where the fence needs to go. But by the time we were done talking, that fence was there. And the question is the rest of the fence a brand new fence, or is it an extension of the 6-foot fence that we've been having out there since 2007? If the alley wasn't there, I think the fence would have been put up at 6 feet in its entirety, and then it would be there by default. But you, as the Planning Commission, can look at that and say, the metal fence isn't there, and anything from this point where it stops right here, stops here because this was an alley. From here to here is brand new fence. And if you believe that that should be considered in isolation of the rest of the fence as a new fence, then it needs to be put up at 8 feet. If you believe it's an extension of a fence that's been out there for 2 years, then it can go up at 6 feet. That's our position.
Dean, let me just ask real quick.
And the
Oh, sorry.
back fence, the rest of his question was the,
Okay, the current, the provisions under which this originally became a salvage yard, and the reason there's no fence at the back is that the old salvage yard code said you have to fence all sides of your salvage yard except if you have a side that's within 25 feet of a rail line. You don't have to fence or screen. And the purpose of that was to allow salvage yards to have unrestricted access to the rail line to load and unload items. Well, that at the time that was established as a auto salvage or graveyard, that was an active rail line. It's not active anymore.
so it would just be that portion that was the old salvage yard. The new portion that they're adding on is new and would
Right.
require fencing.
And we've done our best to take photographs, but you have to look really hard to be on Old Highway 40 and see this from there. So the question for you, which is a judgment call, is either the 6 to 8 foot elevated rail bed and the trees that are there effectively screen it on the north already, or you can say, as a commission, that you think he needs to go in there and plant evergreens or some other side screening along the north side to obscure the view from the north. So we've done our best to go out there and take photographs so you could judge that for yourself. And to a degree, that would be saying that you're granting an exception, but what it really means is you're accepting what's already there as a berm or as a effective screen.
Dean,
If that rail bed wasn't there, then there's no doubt that they'd have to put up something there to obscure the view from the north.
so really, in a sense, we haven't approved this other section of his property, right?
Right.
So as an owner of that property, does he not have a legal right to put up a 6-foot fence around his property if he wants? He could go out there tonight, if we don't approve him, put up a 6-foot fence along there.
That's correct. But he couldn't use that area for auto salvage. But
Granted,
yes,
he
that-
could have
it-
already-
It could be, so the fact that he put the 6-foot fence running east-west was not illegal. It was a voluntary fence. It just didn't meet the intent and purpose of what the fence was required for.
Right.
But you as a commission, in exercising your judgment, can either say, we're just letting him extend that 6-foot fence that he already put up, or you can say, any fence that's not up today has to be 8 foot tomorrow.
And that's the picture of the 6-foot fence there?
Yes.
And then we're just talking about extending it back, okay.
So what you're seeing is there's the cabinet shop over here on Cherry, and I think this is the new Dave's Auto Center across the other side. But this fence comes here right here. There was an alley. That alley's been vacated, so they would take it on around up here and get it to the wall. And the question is, when they hook on right here to extend it, do they get to just extend it at 6 feet or the way it is, or should they raise all the remaining sections to 8 feet?
I'll weigh in now. I'm okay with a 6-foot fence.
I'm okay with the 6-foot fence. I think anything now is just an attempt to punish the guy, which I'm already embarrassed by this board's attempt to punish him already and punish us in the process of seeing this again this week. So 6 foot's fine with me.
The plan you have in the packet, site development plan, is this a plan that has been agreed to with Mr. Squires?
What we tried to do was take his verbal description of what he intended to do and put it to paper for you.
Okay. And you've reviewed this and you're pleased with it?
We have reviewed it, but there are items here that are within your authority and discretion, not ours.
Well, I was just looking at the possible evergreen planting screen on the north.
Right.
If Mr. Squires has agreed to that, I think I'd be one to go with it.
Okay.
Because the railroad could be abandoned, as someone has suggested, and could become a hike and bike trail.
If you
Or slim, but
Yeah, I think you're right.
look at this, and this is here to tell you what Mr. Squires is proposing. We sat down with him and he said, what I'd like to do is take this fence, extend it just like that, bring it to here at the 6 feet that it is today. So we took that, put it on a plan, and says that's his plan. This was there, and it just says, Mr. Squires can tell you whether that's his idea or not. We did that to depict what we heard discussed, and if you go back and look at minutes from previous meetings, it was a point of discussion with some of the commissioners about whether that should be done. Some of them
Yes.
felt it should, and so that was reflected that way.
Originally, that was my idea as well. I thought that was a good idea until I walked along that way, and there is absolutely no way you could plant trees with those 2 points of V together. What's happened is across the Union Pacific Railroad, they began to try and fill in that land, and it's forcing water down underneath the bridge, and he's got a constant battle. But I commend his efforts actually to try and fill that, because if you've looked at that, it is a cesspool. It is, and as the guy has more dumping right here, what John's showing us, it's merely filling up what used to be a low spot, and it's forcing the water onto his property, which is making a disaster. He's fighting a bigger mess every day. I don't think you'll get trees to grow there. You can't plant trees there. And then if you built up that, where's the water going to go? It's going to, there's only so many places that way. It's got to go somewhere, and it keeps flooding you if you build up. I mean, it's just, did you guys get a chance to walk along the dike? It's just water and mud. There's no planting trees there. And actually, again, like I said, I was for the trees, and I'm not saying the trees will be here forever, but a good section north of that railway already has a row of trees going there. And while I feel like I'd like to see some trees along there, from what I've seen, I think trees are where trees can go. They're not necessarily all on your property, but I think there's enough screening. Now, if they were to get knocked down, we might have a different issue, but currently I think the trees are the only place humanly they can grow.
Well, I'll take a weigh in here. I'll take a little bit of an exception with Mr. Householder's position. I don't think anybody here has got anything punitive in mind for this project. I think, as a board, we're supposed to look at a permit for a piece of land, and that piece of land right now is not permitted as a salvage yard, and that's what we are doing. And I think if the statute reads the fence is supposed to be 8 foot, I think it should be 8 foot. I think, personally, I drove along the back. I didn't get out and walk it, but I drove along the back there, and that's never going to be a scenic byway in Salina. And I think that the trees or what's there is screen enough. I think it looks like an industrial area. The concrete plant that's over there and the buses and all that stuff, I think it doesn't blend in, but it's certainly not, obtrusive in the way it looks. So I would be okay with leaving the back of that as it is right now as well. But as far as the 8-foot screening, I would say that's what the statute says that we're supposed to have. I'd say that's what I'd be in favor of.
I would disagree. I don't think that's what the statute says.
What does it say, Dean? Does it say 8 foot or does it say 6 foot?
Now, if you were establishing a new salvage yard today in a new location, you would have to surround it with an 8-foot fence.
And is this section that we're approving not a new salvage
It
yard?
it is an expanded salvage yard.
Tell me the difference.
Well, the ordinance that we have today is intended to apply to new or expansions of existing salvage areas. So the 8-foot is intended to make that comply. So the only way that we were trying to skin the cat is that there is no doubt if he proposed a 6-foot fence or wall on Cherry Street, we would say that needs to be 8 feet because it's new and that's an expansion area. What we were trying to do is leave a little bit of leeway and practicality to say we're living with a 6-foot metal fence for the vast majority of that section already. The options are to simply extend that 6-foot section till we get to the 8-foot tall wall, or we say nope, that's all brand new and it needs to be 8 foot, and you can look at it either way. Because we're also, which you're not as directly, we're working with all the other salvage yards, some of which are not in complete compliance either. There's a salvage yard on the south side of Cherry that has no solid fences whatsoever. And so what we're doing is working with each one of them individually to nudge them closer to compliance over time. This is different because this is a brand new expansion area. And if we took everything off and said that east-west fence there doesn't exist, that fence isn't there today, and you put in a new fence there, it would need to be 8 feet tall.
And so when you're nudging, are you going to nudge for 6 feet or 8 feet?
We're going to nudge for 8 feet
Okay.
eventually.
So I don't wish to make it difficult for people that want to use their property. I understand that. But my concern is understanding what the codes and regulations are,
Right.
and then accepting those codes and regulations or making exceptions to them, because what you do is you set a precedence in our community then that says others that follow, then they can do what they wish, and then we'll consider exceptions to the codes and regulations. And we've got to be clear on the codes and regulations, understand we are making an exception or we're not. And that's really the issue. And somebody mentioned drainage. I do want to mention that in a conditional use permit, drainage has to be addressed. So the fact that there's poor drainage on that area is part of the responsibility of the owner, as I read the permit requirements. Is that not correct?
It is their responsibility to address the drainage. That is, if they have water coming from off-site, they have to address it. If they have water that they're generating themselves, they have to address. I think what Mr. Householder is pointing out is the fact that the county has allowed some filling to the north, has squeezed water down into this area. Other things that have occurred, the railroad itself has blocked a lot of the natural drainage. The water in this area used to naturally drain to the east and get over to Dry Creek, and it's not doing it anymore. But it is the applicant's responsibility to deal with water or drainage there. We are in absolute complete agreement, and we're trying to do that with every junkyard and salvage yard that we're dealing with, is to deal with them in an even-handed way. And we made that very clear, that under the section in the zoning ordinance, any new screening fence would have to be at least 8 foot tall, but this could be viewed as an extension of the existing 6-foot metal fence that's already in place. So that you can look at that two ways. One, that he's out there and built the fence, but that is your role. And if you are convinced in your mind that that's a new fence, it doesn't exist, so it's new. You would even have the authority, if you wished, supposed, to go back and say, rip out the 6-foot fence and put in 8. You can do that.
Right.
You have that authority. What we're trying to do is, again, we've been working on this 2 years for gradual compliance, and we're nudging it in that direction. And if we could get this thing enclosed by a fence all the way around it, we would be ecstatic. So that's why we have we don't have a different view, but we don't have as purist a view. And I don't view that as an exception. I view that as looking at the circumstances as they are today and applying that. But I don't think it sets a precedent that any new salvage yard or other operation comes in that the new standard becomes 6 feet. The standard is 8 feet. And if you say that any unbuilt sections have to be 8 feet tall, we would fully support that.
Currently, there's no fence where the alley used to be and the 126 feet to the block wall. There's no fence there now.
Right. It's
So
completely...
we could make that 8 feet if we feel that's a new fence.
Right. And you could do that because you think it's more effective, or you think that you need to do that because you don't want to set a precedent of granting some exception.
While we're weighing in, if Mr. Mikesell still believes his original statement, I would concur with the fact that I think it's difficult on that north end to require natural screening, and there is some natural site obscuring there, but I think this is new, and I would be hard-pressed to, down the line, say it needs to be 8 feet, and then with new fence that this isn't 8 feet, so I would. Right. And one other question, those trees that did need to remain.
Yes, they do.
Out of whether that's going to happen or not. But.
So that would be our responsibility.
Okay.
Monitor that, and if they don't survive, they would need to be replanted.
All right. Thank you.
Again, re-emphasize. Needs to come up to that microphone.
The alley to get it vacated. They said to stop and don't put up no more fence, so we didn't. I don't know how now that I can raise 2 foot on the fence. At the cost, I hate to tear the fence down.
What about the unbuilt portion? To get this thing all
the
moved
unbuilt
along
portion, I can do whatever you say. The portion that's there now, I mean, I don't know how you add 2 feet to the top of the fence, and especially the biggest concern with the fence is the wind from the north, which I can't control. And it's just like the gate on the front. I had a metal gate there, and you cannot close it. I was there today before I come here, and I had to go call somebody to help me close the gate because you can't because of the wind. But I put the screening on. I mean, I'm trying to do everything I can, but I just keep running into snags, and this would have been done a long time ago, except it just keeps getting drug on and on and on. And I mean, I've owned the land long enough, but the rules keep changing. Just like the fence. The fence was fine. If I would have known it had to be 8 foot fence, it had all been 8 foot. I mean, every inch of it had been 8 foot fence already, but they said 6 foot, we put up 6 foot.
Well, if you were building a brand new this was raw space, you were getting a permit for this, you knew that it had to be all 8 foot fences, how would you suggest dealing with the wind coming from the north in the winter and the south in the summer and whatever? I mean, I
would almost probably be comfortable in saying that it's about going to have to be rock.
Be what?
Rock, like them blocks.
Oh, a concrete.
Yeah.
Show us that picture again, John.
That's what you would require?
I'm impressed with that fence.
No, that's what I'm saying. If it was all to be done again, that's probably what I would have done, because we put fence up. The wind actually rips it right off of the post, and we put it, we put it back up. Well, we have to put new up every time. but it's just because of the wind. It's not because the posts blow over or because it's cheap metal. It's just the wind, and I mean, I can't control that.
So if you were writing new regulations for us, you would suggest that would be,
Well, I think if I was writing a new regulation, I think that'd be up to the landowner, because them blocks, they're $65 a piece, and that's every 6 feet times 4.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, it does have a big cost to it, but on the other hand, like on
You're
this
not gonna
here,
have to
the
do
reason I
anything.
done that, because I'll never need to do
Right.
anything of that again, never.
yeah. But you
And
understand.
nobody's going to drive through it. It's not going to fall down. It's not going to burn. It's not going to blow over. So.
But you understand the need for fencing? Or you don't agree with that even? Okay,
Yeah, I agree with the fencing.
Okay.
Yeah, I do agree with the
Okay.
fencing. I think it's needed, but even where the new property extends going north and then east, I'm not sure you'll be able to see that fence once it's up.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm going to put the fence up, but I'm not sure you'll be able to see it.
There comes that word practical again.
Yeah, I mean,
And if you look at page 4, the draft in there for the fencing and screening, the choices are a solid fence, a wall, which could be masonry or block, as he's chosen. If you wanted to, you could put in an earthen berm that was 8 feet tall. We have seen those before around sand pits and concrete plants and things of that nature. Or you can
Chain
even
link.
put in chain link
Right.
fence if you want to plant evergreens
Right.
densely around the perimeter of it and use your evergreens for the visual.
so I think we've made
screening.
provisions for the wind element.
Yeah.
So there's a menu of choices there, and we've tried to leave it open.
Yeah.
And
So to
you
speak.
learn from experience, and we've had that discussion with every salvage yard dealer, that these solid metal panel fences, the supports are fine, but they catch the wind, and if you have a 50-mile-an-hour sustained wind, you're probably going to have it buckle or topple over. And so,
And then have to be replaced.
right, and so I guess we don't want to overuse the word, but we're trying to be practical too, that if you're going to have this land use out there, you've got to have gates and fences and things that are practical to use and maintain. So they're learning, we're learning as we go.
Any other questions of Mr. Squires? If not, thank you.
Thank you.
This is a continuation of a public hearing. Is there anyone in the public that wishes to address this issue? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the bench for possible action.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we approve application C09-1 with the following exceptions: that the area to the north adjacent to the roadway be allowed to not have screening due to the nature of the berm and the existing trees that are there, and that the new fence, the 179.9 feet and the 126.0 feet, be, as the statute reads, at 8 feet.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any additional comments?
Well, I'll vote yes just to get it across, but I just want to point out that I think we are just the tone of this board over this whole thing lets me know that we're trying to, in some way, punish Mr. Squires and what's been going on. I've never heard this board get so aggravated or agitated at any one application since I've been on this board. I think the 8-foot is punitive, and I would just want to point that out before I do cast my vote. I do want to see you approved. I do want to see you go. I think this board is going to vote for your 8-foot, but I think we are being punitive with it, and I just want that to go on the record.
And then if we're making editorial comments, I want to make one as well, if I may. Is
Go
that
ahead.
appropriate?
Yes?
You know, I feel badly that it has went this long as well. I think that people have a right and a responsibility to use their property in the way that's most appropriate for them, and also in a way that's for the betterment of a community, as the reason for codes and regulations. In this case, it's the responsibility of all of us to help improve our community, to make it look better, to make it something we're proud of. Entryways are essential to communities, and this happens to be an entryway. I looked at the plan. I can only act on the regulations I see and the plan and visits to the location. We are accepting some of what you proposed in the plan. We're making exceptions to some of the regulations. I just want it noted that I'm not necessarily in agreement of that type of exception unless we're going to allow similar type of exceptions on other projects as they come forward, sincerely for the sake of just making it convenient for the owner. That means that all of us then can ask for exceptions on items that we don't necessarily agree with the codes or regulations on. And if that's what we're saying, then so be it.
That's why we're here. That's exactly why we're here. It is for those exceptions.
And I don't agree with it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Hey, Dean, if we vote this in and then we want to make an amendment to it, like the 6-foot, 8-foot fence area and vote on it separately, is that possible to make a second?
Well,
And we could just
the
vote on that
motion-
separately.
The motion is very clear that it's to approve the conditional use permit, and as a conditional use permit, it's appropriate to have conditions attached, and the motion is to condition that on the interpretation that that is a new fence, the part that's not built, and it needs to be at least 8 feet tall. I think the appropriate thing is if someone disagrees with the condition of the 8 foot, they should vote against the motion, and if it doesn't prevail, then an alternative motion can be offered.
Gerald? This could go on forever. How big a deal is it for you to put up an 8-foot fence?
The rest of the fence?
Yeah.
I mean, I'll do whatever. I mean, I can do the 8-foot fence on the rest of it. It's just where it's at now. I just don't know how to do that without
Tear
tearing
out
it
the other
down.
fence. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
No, the motion is that the portion of the
Just in
fence that's
6
not
foot.
built yet
Yeah.
would need to be 8 feet.
The only thing I have
yeah.
to say about the fence is that you won't be able to see it, so,
Yeah.
I mean, but it's a technicality.
Yeah. Okay, we've discussed it. Anything else to be said? All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No, yes, whichever way you say it, I'm opposed.
You're opposed?
Yes.
You're opposed? How
No.
many in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
And one
6
against.
in favor and 1 opposed.
Yes.
Seems to me it carries 6-1.
So what that will mean is that Mr. Squires will need to come in and he will need to make that section at least 8 feet tall, the portion that's not built yet.
Yes.
And the motion did not include any provision for planting of trees along the north.
Right.
And so that, from staff's perspective, is not an exception, but simply a recognition of the conditions that are already there.
Okay. Are we done with item 2? Let's go on to item 3.
We hope so.
Application number Z09-4 filed by Deborah Burt, requesting a change in zoning district classification from R3, multifamily residential, to C1 restricted business. The subject property is legally described as the east 85 feet of Lot 7 on 9th Street in Bishop's Addition to the city of Salina, Saline County, Kansas, and addressed as 155 North 9th Street. Report, Dean, please.
The corner of Ash and 9th, particularly the southwest corner, from all of our research, has historically been zoned commercially since the 1950s. And the building that you see there today was constructed in 1951 as a gasoline service station. Conversely, the lot directly to the south of it has always been zoned residential and was the site of a large apartment building that was later used as a rest home. And that rest home was demolished in 1971, and that lot has sat vacant since that time. In 1991, there was a brand new residential dwelling that was constructed just to the south of that on the what you see in the left-hand side of the picture there. That dwelling was constructed in 1991, so it's a fairly new construction. The situation you have here is a very small lot basically 50 foot by 80 feet east-west that is the site of the current gasoline service station. And there's a twin of that to the south that is zoned R3. And due to expanding business and staffing, and also to create a new handicapped accessible entrance with accessible parking on the south side of the building, the applicant, who is also the owner of the lot to the south, is requesting the rezoning of that property from the R3 residential to the C1 restricted business to allow construction of a parking area on the lot, and to have it match the zoning of the insurance office on the corner. And C1 and R3 are pretty similar zones from the standpoint that they are kind of intended to be buffer zones or districts between more intense commercial and less intense residential. So you'll find C1 and R3 as kind of step down zoning between commercial areas and more single family residential areas. I think we've set out for you some of the basic parameters for parking areas, that all spaces have to be a minimum of 8.5 feet wide and 19 feet in depth. If you have 90-degree parking, you need a 24-foot wide aisle to support that. And if you are a business that is a new business that has obtained a building permit to make any modifications to an existing building, you've got to provide handicapped accessible parking, and it's based on the number of spaces provided. In this case, there would need to be at least one handicap space, and that would need to be a van accessible space. For driveways, there's a limited, if you have 10 feet or less than 18 feet, you'd be limited to a one-way drive. There's a driveway at the south end of this lot. I think it's depicted in the photograph there. If you look at the property line and where the fence is, it's somewhat questionable whether it has the required 10-foot width. There's a power pole you can see in one of the pictures that really prevents it from being widened out to the north. And the owners to the south of the single-family home have expressed concern about its use. Their first contention is that it's not a shared driveway, but it's just been used and worn down over time by people driving over it, and they've also indicated that their fence has been hit several times just because it is a very tight access there. And if this were approved as proposed, this would basically provide on-site parking for the insurance office, because this would be merged into the insurance office site. The other aspects of that deal with landscaping and screening. And there's a requirement for screening. If you have 6 or more parking spaces and you're adjacent to a residential home, you need to have a 6-foot screen between your parking lot, and this has existing fencing on the south and on the west. So if we look at the suitability of the site for redevelopment, the request area only has 4,250 square feet. If you were looking at C1, minimum lot size is 7,500, and in R3 it's 6,000. This has less than that, but if you merge it with the lot to the north, you come up with an 8,500 square foot lot, which is more reasonable. We think another thing to look at is the rest home was demolished, and the site has been sitting vacant for 38 years under the current R3 zoning, so that's an indication that it's probably not a redevelopment or reconstruction site for residential. If you look at zoning, you have C4 to the east and C1 on the corner, and then you get into residential as you move farther west. So this would be a very logical expansion of the existing C1 lot and 9th Street really is a transition zone between the central business district and the residential to the west. So your alternatives would be to approve the C1 zoning as requested. You could deny this rezoning request if you believe the zoning classification of C1 would not fit with the zoning and uses of nearby property. Our recommendation would be to approve the rezoning of the site for the reasons that we cited on page 7 of your report there. I think the only item that we would be concerned about primarily would be the use of that existing curb cut. We think if it was used, I think, and maybe Mr. Stack has an opinion on that, that this really doesn't meet our standards for a driveway approach. It's hard to know what's underneath there, but that might need to be enhanced or beefed up there. The alternative, and John, do you have the schematic layout for the parking lot? We get our bearings here. This is Ash, this is 9th, this concrete apron is all existing, and what we would like to do is that this access is open. One possibility is to not use this at all, and just have people that park here come back out this way. The other alternative, because of its width, is to limit it to one way only. We think that people are much less likely to hit the target and miss the fence if it's exit only than it would be if people were trying to enter that way. So we think it may be workable to make that a one-way driveway, but if it were, our recommendation would be one way out only and not one way in, because just of the concerns of the narrowness and the angle at the fences there. And I don't know if you could go back to that shot, John, that shows the fence and the angle of the driveway there. But the fence is perfectly legal. It's in the correct location. It's on the property line. We can't find a lot of evidence there for how, if that was in fact a shared driveway that straddled the property line historically, but it has been used, but you can tell when you compare it to the driveway approach just to the south of it, it's not done to the same standard, and it probably ought to be enhanced if it's going to be used in that manner. So I think with that, we'd be happy to address any questions about the C1 zoning or the site itself. The applicant, Ms. Bird, is here also if you have questions.
Any questions of staff?
So you're saying if that is approved as, for instance, an exit only, then that would need to be concreted as the parking lot?
We believe that the parking lot is going to need to be paved with either asphalt or concrete. Mr. Stack can explain what our standard is for a driveway approach, but all driveway approaches in the right-of-way would have to be concrete and done to a certain thickness.
That's correct. And I didn't know if this was the time to say that or if that will come later, but yeah, we'd like to see that driveway approach improved if they're going to utilize it.
And what about
But it isn't standard. I mean, it isn't wide enough, is it?
No, it's not for two-way. So he's right. You could really only make it one way out, and I don't know if is that something we have in a lot of places?
If that light pole, that's a street light, and that telephone pedestal, if that has to be moved, whose responsibility is that?
The property owners. Yeah, if it was a city project, we were widening 9th Street, then it would be the utility responsibility to move those poles. But since it's a private property owner's I mean, they're the ones that want to widen the driveway, then they'd be responsible for the costs associated with that.
It looked to us like, I mean, this does look like almost a curb return, but you can't really tell, and you can't tell how much of it, where it actually is here, how much of it's actually buried under something. But it was in disuse for a very long period of time.
Well, there's also a drainage curb inlet there, isn't there?
Yes, there is, to the north, right.
So even if you move the pole, you couldn't get a regular...
Yeah, it's a good point, Monroe. There's three problems with trying to widen that driveway. I thought power poles, you can usually move those for fairly reasonable. Telephone gets more expensive. Boy, the inlet box, that's expensive. So it's going to be tough to move it. Yep.
What is, for a single one-way, what's kind of a width we like to see?
10 foot
It's a
or
minimum of 10 feet.
minimum 10,
And what do we see roughly from the
I
edge
think-
of that pole? I know we couldn't build right up to the pole, but from that pole to about that center crack in the line, which I assume is the property line, any idea?
It's supposed to be 11.5 feet.
Okay, so if we have a
There's a
foot,
chance at 10.
so if we have a 1.5 foot setback without even giving them a variance, we're good to go with the single lane of traffic. So that's not a concern for me. I do think that probably was the entrance looking at the old property. I think that probably was the driveway to the house that's there. So I would disagree with the owner that wasn't a shared driveway. I think that's exactly what it is. The city doesn't just take gutters out and not put them back for a reason. I mean, that was obviously some sort of inlet there, so I'm inclined to at least give a one-way.
What about the sidewalk? That's not a traditional sidewalk there, is it?
No, there's some overgrown around it. John Berger has worked with a lot of people on restoration of brick sidewalks, but it is rather a limited section of bricks. I mean, it's not really part of a neighborhood pattern, so we're reluctant to do that, but it may be a case where long-term that would be replaced by a standard concrete sidewalk. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, John.
In this location, it's intermittent. There is a herringbone brick sidewalk that continues up this site from the property to the south. It terminates at the concrete drive and then starts again at the north. It is in disrepair at this point, though, and it probably have to be restored somewhat to be passable. This isn't really in a historic district or a place where we're considering the historic context for that. Is going to be primarily a usability.
So is it considered usable in this condition?
Given where it's covered up in some places and because of the overgrowth there, it probably doesn't have the required width that you would need. But the what's going to occur is that this is probably all going to get removed here, and you're going to have some pavement surface right up to the edge of it like this, and then depending on whether the applicant would use asphalt or concrete for the surface of the parking lot. If it was concrete, it would be a good time to have the concrete contractor out there and more or less replace that section all at one or even as part of the driveway approach.
Which would be the city doing that?
That would be the applicant's concrete contractor.
But so the applicant's responsible for the sidewalk?
That's correct. The city has a policy for new sidewalks on arterial streets, but not for repair of existing.
Okay.
Are there any programs for assisting the...
There's a neighborhood services, Dean. We have it on our sidewalk repair notice that we have to send out to people. It's their responsibility to maintain their sidewalks to a certain standard, and trip hazard, gap, whatever that bricks, if there's some problems with the bricks, whether a trip hazard or disrepair. I haven't looked at this one, but
there's a grant program, but it's income-based. So
It's
you have to
income-based,
meet
okay.
certain income guidelines to be eligible
I
for
thought it was,
assistance.
more for residential applications than commercial or business, right?
It's a brick sidewalk to the south
Correct.
of this driveway, and it's not in bad shape. It's been cleaned up, and it looks like you could even get a wheelchair down that sidewalk, but this section right here, I don't know how you'd get a wheelchair down that. And the city has spent money at the 9th and Ash curbs to make handicap
Yeah.
accessible, and
Accessible ramps, right?
it seems like this sidewalk just has to be improved.
And we tried, I mean, with our sidewalk repair policy that just went to commission a couple of months ago, really, we tried to give everybody the option to do, I mean, they can take all the bricks out and relay them if they want to. I mean, we're not going to force them to just put concrete in there, but arguably that'd probably be the easiest.
And just one other question, the screening issue between this property and then the residence, the fence doesn't meet that requirement as it is now, is that correct?
Yes, it does.
It does?
Yes.
So no further screening
No further
would be
screening is
necessary?
required.
Okay.
We run into this situation frequently where if the residence is there that's the residence's fence. There first, they put the fence up.
Okay.
We're not going to make the business put up a fence when the fence is already
Okay.
there. And you've got the photograph, but you can see there's a residence on the west, there's a privacy fence there. Because we require fences in front yards to stair step to 3 feet, so as you move back, the elevation of that fence raises to 6 feet, but it's lower there to allow for visibility at 9th Street.
Who installed that fencing?
The owner of the house to the south.
To the south and to the west?
I'm not sure about the west.
Has this lot been used as parking all these years since that building was demolished?
No, but it was intermittently when it was a jewelry shop. It wasn't surfaced, though.
Any questions of staff? Is the owner or the applicant here? Would you care to visit with us at the microphone, please? Ms. Burt?
We plan to go ahead and lay concrete at the sidewalk area and the entry area as well, or the exit area as it's proposed today. And we've used it, we've been there since '05, and we've used it for parking area since then. Farmers Insurance Group was in the area before that, and I know they used it as parking. So, any questions?
Are you okay with that just being an exit? I mean, you kind of see their traffic flow idea.
I do. It's permissible. We'll make it work.
Yeah, I could see where it could be, maybe making that an entrance makes maybe a little more sense and the exit the other way, but maybe that's something we should finesse, but it's okay with you.
It would be fine. Actually, the place where the fence has been hit is actually on the owner of the residential property side rather than our drive side, so I would take issue with that claim.
Sure.
There's no
Lots of claims anyway.
plantings or anything required between the sidewalk and the edge of the parking lot. That can all be one continuous slab.
It can as an extension of the existing. We're back to the discussion we had before. If this was a vacant lot and they were building an insurance office and putting in a parking lot, there would have to be a green space buffer along both Ash and 9th Street.
But you're forgiving the
But,
ash.
but this is a continuation of that pattern of the fully paved front yard.
So they could pave,
They can
include
they
the
can take
sidewalk in
that
their paving.
they can take that pattern here and bring it down here.
I missed that. Do that again.
I didn't see it either.
If this was a vacant lot and nothing was on here and you were designing it from scratch, you would have to have a planting strip in here with bushes and a buffer between 9th Street along here
Oh.
and along Ash. But because we've already got concrete out to the sidewalk here and it's just an extension of that pattern, their paving is going to come up right here to the edge of the sidewalk, and that would be an opportune time to address the sidewalk as well, because the paving's going to butt up right next to it.
Deb,
But-
did you say, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
did you say you were going to redo the sidewalk tear all the bricks out and put new
And
sidewalk.
concrete it.
And there's no planting required then in the greens, in the parking, in the green space?
That is correct.
Okay.
That's just right away
Okay.
that gets mowed and maintained, but we don't want plantings out there.
Just as a side note, John, is there any people who are maintaining brick sidewalks who would be interested in some of Miss Burt's bricks, if she's going to be pulling them up? Those old classics to sort of maintain that look instead of putting new bricks in, or?
We do get inquiries from time to time about mining some bricks, and that'd be appropriate in this
Well,
case.
just a sideline, you might.
Sure.
The city has an enormous brick pile. So
Oh, they do?
We have
What I-
plenty of bricks.
Oh, okay, okay. Well,
Yeah,
I
the-
thought maybe if they were scarce, we might, help the community a little bit. If we were concerned about losing that pattern, we could at least restore some of the others. But if we've got a big stack, we won't worry about it.
Yeah, they're out the wastewater treatment plant. 'Cause it is interesting, because, yeah, people ask that question. We've got quite a few, but I guess if they're hard to dispose of, I guess the city would take them too,
Okay.
because we do use them elsewhere.
Thank you.
They're classic, and they should not be destroyed. Any
But I
further
wouldn't want
questions?
one in front of my house to maintain. So-
Any further questions of the applicant? Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a conditional a zoning change, so it is a public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience like to speak to this issue? Seeing none, we'll bring it to the bench for consideration and for the action.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend that we, application Z09-4 be approved and changed from R3 to C1.
I'd second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Editorial comment? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 7-0.
Bring that corner up a little bit.
Better. Editorial's good.
Number 4, application number CU09-2 filed by Christ Cathedral requesting approval of a conditional use permit to establish and operate a preschool in an R3 multifamily residential district. The subject property, I won't read all that, is addressed at 138 South 8th Street. Dean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are directly south of the property that you were just discussing that's at 9th and Ash. This is the Christ Church Cathedral. That's located between 8th and 9th Street and just north of Walnut. The bottom of the photograph there in the lower right corner is the Ashby House, but everything to the west and north of that is considered the site for the Christ Church Cathedral. And what they'd like to do is use the lower floor, which is basically the church's Sunday school space, and establish a weekday preschool in that location. It is planned and intended to be a Montessori preschool. The church congregation is fully supportive of that, but it will be operated by an independent governing board, and they plan to use the Montessori model of curriculum and instruction for preschool-age children. And their plan would be to have up to 14 3- to 6-year-old children per session. They have one session planned now for beginning the next, or preceding the next school year. They would follow all the state regulations and requirements for preschools, which are administered by our local health department. The space, again, is the lower level of the classroom wing and office wing of the cathedral. It's had an inspection by fire, building services, and health departments, and there were a couple of items that they needed to address as far as exiting from the lower level. Their plan is to be in the lower level, exit out to the upper level, and they plan to fence and enlarge the existing playground area they have there to meet preschool requirements. And so, again, the site is used as Sunday school space on Sundays, so they're not, it's very suitable for the intended use. Your role here is just to determine whether the church would remain compatible with the surrounding neighborhood if the preschool operation were added, which would be more of a daytime, weekday use than what's currently there at the church, a little bit of an intensification. So there's no zoning ordinance limitation on the number of children. It's a function of the space available and the classroom sizes, and there is adequate parking and drop-off available. There are no physical changes or modifications that are proposed either to the church building itself or to any of the improvements on the grounds, again, except for they're planning to expand and enhance the playground and get more age-appropriate items for preschool age students. And their plan is not to exceed 14 students at any one time. So we think this is a very suitable and appropriate use of a weekday use of a church building, would fit in well with the existing neighborhood. The First Presbyterian Church to the south of this has a large child care center there as well, so this would be very comparable and compatible with that. So our recommendation would be to approve this addition of a weekday preschool. We would work with them on temporary signage as it gets established to establish the loading and unloading areas till parents become accustomed to that, and we would finalize a final inspection to make sure that all the life safety code and building code requirements have been met. But our recommendation would be to approve the addition of a preschool to the Christ Cathedral property.
Any questions of staff? Could we hear from the applicant? Your name and address, please.
My name is Joe Reed, and I'm president of the Christ Cathedral Montessori School Board, which operates as a separate entity from the church. We're covered through the church's insurance and all of that, but we are separate from the regular operation of the church. I think you have all the information in front of you. We will have signage that the parents will come in through the entry, drop their children off, and then exit through the north end of that parking lot. So the traffic should move. It will be, as you've noted in here, after the morning traffic period, and we plan to operate from 8:45 until 11:45, 4 days a week. Do you have any questions?
14 children.
We hope to begin with 14 children.
You have capacity for more if...
According to the health department, we could have 34. We don't want 34 right now.
It'll be a nice addition to Salina, right?
I think
Have a Montessori school will be a nice...
I think we will fill a real niche here in town.
I just have to say, I was at my granddaughter's in Houston, and they're in and out, which I thought was so smart, is the parents drive up and the teachers are right there, take the kids out of the car, and then the parents just go on. And it's just a revolving thing that's a pretty darn slick, so.
We have that spelled out in our parents' handbook, that the teacher will bring the child to the car. When the child is safely buckled in, the car leaves, the next car pulls
great.
up.
Good.
Very nice.
So there shouldn't really be much backup on 9.
Oh, no.
Nice big parking lot.
It is. It's plenty big.
Okay, any further questions of Ms. Reed? This is a conditional use permit, and it's a public hearing. Thank you, Ms. Reed.
Thank you.
Public hearing, anyone from the public wish to speak? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board and hopefully some action.
I'd make a motion that we approve the conditional use request
With the two staff recommended,
with exactly as per staff recommended.
I'll second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So be it. 7-0. Item number 5. Application number CU 09-4 filed by Earl Graybeal, requesting approval of a conditional use permit to allow the addition of an outdoor patio to a drinking establishment located in the C4 Central Business District. The subject property is the Rendezvous Bar, which is legally described as, and I won't go through that, in the city of Salina, addressed at 249 North Santa Fe Avenue. Report from Dean.
Mr. Hers is going to present this report, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Dean?
Some background information on the conditional use permit that you have in front of you. In September of 2001, the City Commission approved an ordinance that required a conditional use permit for any request by a drinking establishment to create an outdoor patio area. And since the applicant already, although he does have an established drinking business, the trigger for this is the outdoor patio area. In April, earlier this year in April, the owner, Mr. Graybeal of the Rendezvous Bar, came to us to request a permit for the outdoor patio area. The bar has been in business and existing for little over 15 years now. The area that you see here, it's the total area of the lot, and you don't see the north edge, but it's a 50 feet wide by 120 feet deep lot, and there is about 27 feet in this area right here. So the current structure is about 23 feet wide, so we have 27 feet left over. And if you can go to the site plan, John. What the applicant is proposing to do here, look at the site plan. I think it's number 2, John?
Yes, here we go.
Okay, there we go. What the applicant is proposing to do is, this patio area is about 25 feet by 36 feet with an indention on the northwest corner of the patio area for the current utilities and AC unit. There are there's 12 tables, which constitutes occupant load of 52 people. The walls on the outside, there's a close-up, and you can see the overhead here. There are plantings. There's a 1.5 foot high planting at the bottom with a 3.5 foot fence on top of that for a total height of the fence being about 5 feet, with a pergola over the top of the fence that's about 8 feet. You can see it. It's there. It's pretty faint. And the design of the pergola and the function is to house a lighting system that will be above the fence and above this landscape bed. So this landscape bed is there to add aesthetic purposes and value to the patio area, as well as hopefully damper some of the sound, as the sound and the increased occupant load are two of the main reasons that the City Commission originally required that these types of outdoor patio areas become conditional use permits. The applicant states that this is a continuation or extension of his current business that has been in practice for 15 years or more, and staff would agree, but the purpose of our meeting here isn't to just look at the aesthetic features that are involved, but also some of the social ramifications that we're dealing with. So we're going to be looking at what kind of outdoor sound is going to be increased by having this outdoor patio area, and some of the potential drawbacks with outdoor drinking areas is the difficulty in managing who enters and exits, because we do have gates that are required for emergency access and leaving the facility in case of an emergency or a fire. And there's also an opportunity for patrons of the bar to take drinks and either sneak out or hand them to other people over the fence. There have been complaints about that in the past. So those are some of the things that we'll need to focus on and address during our meeting here today. I think the applicant's perception or observation that this proposed outdoor patio area is very similar to the Paramount Bar, which came to the Planning Commission here a couple of years ago, is very accurate. There are many similarities, not many differences. They're both in the C4 district, and neither of them require off-street parking. So parking isn't an issue. We're not increasing any water runoff per se, so drainage shouldn't really be an issue. We're not requiring any more utilities. So the main focus is going to be the social ramifications of the outdoor area and how that's going to impact the neighborhood. The options or alternatives that the board would have, as always, would be to approve the request of the applicant with or without any kind of conditions. We could table the request of the applicant if more information is needed, or it is possible to deny the request of the applicant. What staff would recommend is we would recommend approval with two conditions. One of them being that the plan shall be modified to limit the occupant load to fewer than 50 people. Currently, there is an occupant load of 52, so that would be, in essence, that would be removing one of the tables. And the reasoning for that is so that we can get the exit requirements down to one rather than having two exit requirements, because anytime we go over 50, the fire code requires us to have two exits out of that patio area. And the other condition of approval would be that there would be a push bar mechanism that would open the gate from the inside only when it is pushed, and then an alarm is sounded. That way the management employment of the owner is alerted if anybody is trying to escape with either a drink or not paying, or it also, if there is an emergency, it can help alert other patrons and customers of the bar. So those would be the recommendations we would have, and again, the discussion will revolve around those social implications of the possibility of people escaping, handing alcohol over the fence, and I believe Dean has had a conversation with a nearby property owner who had some direct concerns about those issues that he would like to speak on.
One of the items that it worked well at the time and it worked well at the start, the patio at the Paramount, there previous to that you had two exits and entrances into the Paramount. You had the front door on Santa Fe, and you had a rear door that you could get to the alley. And when you enclose that with a fenced patio, you basically took away the rear as a fire exit for the facility. So to construct that patio, you had to build in some gated exit there. And what has been a source of difficulty with that is the fire alarm and the hardware and all were installed properly at the beginning, but then you've got to keep that maintained. So there are some practical hardships with that don't necessarily arise here because of the way that it is set up. But when you are at a situation like the Paramount and you have a gated exit to the patio and it's alarmed, well, really you shouldn't be using that for deliveries, but it does happen. But it's also the route by which employees take loads out to the dumpster and things of that nature. So it becomes labor intensive for the management, and in the case of the Paramount, there have been complaints about the disabling of the alarm mechanism and the use of that for in and out traffic, and what the concern of some of the property owners abutting this, and you have it in writing in front of you at your places there, is all things being equal, them that owners would rather see the traffic between bars occur out on Santa Fe on the sidewalk and not in the rear alley. That's more of a paramount issue than it is here, but the concern of this particular owner that is the letter in front of you is why on the rendezvous do you have to have two exits from the patio, one at the front and one in the rear? Our answer to that has to do with the occupant load of the patio. The architect can address that in more detail, but if you had an occupant load less than 50, you would only need one gated exit from the patio area. What this owner is saying is that they would prefer that rather than having this where it is, they believe that the patio should be required to be here with the exit onto the alley and not here, but that not being the case, they would prefer not to have the two ways in and out. That just becomes for, like I said, in the case of the Paramount, it worked well at the beginning, but then it becomes the point of the Paramount and a requirement from the Planning Commission was that the customer entrance and exit for the Paramount was to be maintained at Santa Fe, and the gate was put in only for emergency exit purposes. Well, there have been cases where the gate is simply left open as an in and out for the bar patrons, and so that works well to begin with, but it will be a monitoring process. But the concern of some of the owners there is they would like to see the bar patrons more or less forced to use the Santa Fe sidewalk as the pedestrian route and not the rear alley. So they're concerned about having alley exiting gates that cease to be used as emergency fire exits and become a primary in and out, that becomes a place for alcohol to be carried out of the establishment or carried in for that matter. So it then becomes a policing matter for the management of the bar. But the letter that you have in front of you is concerned about they would rather have this at the rear than the side, and they're concerned about the plan for having two, basically, which creates a bar. You've got two in and outs for the bar and then two gates as well. And our understanding of that is that it's the fact that you have an occupant load of over 50 for this patio, which is larger than what you have for the Paramount, which is under 50. But that's something that the applicant's architect can address.
Any further questions of Dean?
I have one. John, could you show us where the electronics of Salina is in proximity to this bar?
Where's the Paramount bar?
With the rendezvous being, of course, on the northern part of the block there, but this would be the electronics shop.
So there's a building between them, then, is that correct?
This is the vacant lot. Right.
Yeah.
This is where the patio's going.
Right.
Okay.
What's that building just to the north of the electronics shop?
What that's occupied with. It's been something off and on.
Massage deal.
Yeah, that's where Fontella is.
Fontellas or
Yeah,
something like that.
Fontella's there.
What is it?
Fontella. She's a massage therapist.
A big building.
I think there's another.
Now, there's a big empty lot next to the gravel, and then there's Fontella's. That's at least a 25-foot space, and then another 25-foot before you get to the electronics.
Any further questions of staff? Could we hear from the applicant or its representative?
Yes.
Name, address?
Good afternoon. My name is Warren Ediger. I'm the architect for this project, and my business address is 116 South Santa Fe. Couple of things just real quickly. The occupant load of the patio, as shown on the plan, is 48, so it doesn't require 2 exits from a fire code standpoint. The exits were there as a matter of convenience. The number is not a critical item for the applicant. We can adjust that number as needed. Also, the fire department, I believe, would allow us to completely do away with the exits, the gates, and exit back through the building if that was a desired alternative, because our occupant load does not exceed the capacity of the bar. The 2 existing exits in the bar have enough capacity of width to be able to handle the exit load that would be added by the patio.
With a full bar
Full
plus
bar.
this?
The bar is rated at 88 occupants. There are 48 chairs shown in the patio, and that's below what would be the exit capacity of the doors, which is how the fire department would look at it. And if we propose to do that, that would be something that they would review and approve prior to implementing it.
But you want exits from the patio as a matter of convenience?
That's why they were proposed, yes.
You envision that existing gravel being a parking lot back there still?
I think it probably would be used by employees. I don't know that it would be, I mean, it's kind of difficult access when you take the front entrance out of it, so it's not going to see a lot of use.
Okay.
What will be the floor surface?
Currently, it's gravel, and I think it's going to be concrete or paving.
Okay.
Did you consider at all putting the patio in the back, or is that something the owner considered?
That's really not very feasible, other than to just take it where it is now and shove it to the back, and then we have exiting issues out of the back of the bar, the same thing that occurred at the Paramount. By putting it where it is now, we maintain the existing exits out of the bar, the delivery entrance and everything, so we're not having to take any traffic through the patio. If it's pushed to the back, it's going to interfere with normal use and deliveries to the bar.
Warren, would just having one exit from the patio onto Santa Fe, would that create a problem for the owner? It sounds like somebody was suggesting not having the back exit from the patio. Is that a particular problem?
Actually, I think I heard them say they didn't want the exit onto Santa Fe. I don't know what the objection is to 1 or 2 exits. It doesn't, but from the owner's or from the applicant's standpoint, I don't think it makes any difference.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of laws in place to arrest people who take liquor out of the thing. I don't think we should impose a new law. And I mean, it seems like one day we're looking at there's not enough exits in places, and the next day we're telling them you can't have these exits. So I don't have a problem with the exits at either place. If
the state regulates that much more than what the city does as far as the alcohol.
Yeah, that's what I say. I think that we have laws in place to arrest the people who carry it out. That's not our concern here. If the applicant wants those exits, I'd support them.
What does this have over the top? Is there a canopy or
the main part of the patio is open, and then above the fence there's just a little grill work of 2x4s that runs across the top there.
You're not trying to protect people from a slight rain or anything like that?
No. In the case of the similar enclosure at the Paramount, they put some umbrellas above the table. So, I mean, that's the fence structure there is almost identical to this.
There's a pergola over the top, is that correct? Or?
Not the entire, it's about 2 feet wide, and it just follows the fence.
Oh, okay.
It visually defines the fence. It gives, there's a planter there, and they put vines in it, and it grows up over the top of it. It's also a place to mount the lights so that there's some area lighting around the perimeter of it.
Is this a plastic fence, Warren?
I'm afraid this one's wood.
We have a little personal issue.
Yeah. They don't
White plastic?
Uh-huh.
I have a question, Warren.
Yes.
You're saying that you believe that there are no fire exits required for this patio?
We probably need to visit with
I
fire marshal.
Yeah, I spoke with Roger on this, and he said 50 is the number from 1 to 2, and 1 would be required definitely. If the occupant load went over 50, 2 would be required. That's my understanding.
That's based on a defined area and the exits required out of it. If you're below 50, then you have 1 exit required. However, in this case, the exit for the patio can be back through the existing building. It doesn't have to go directly to the outside. We can go through the bar to get to the existing exits to go outside.
Bar's on fire.
Well, I think, I mean, from what you're saying is, you've got the 12 tables here, an occupant load of 48.
Yes.
So you're under 50 anyway, so if we have 1, it's a moot point, but
Correct.
I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a convenience to having a gate there. It has to be monitored and controlled according to the alcohol laws.
Sure.
So it's just an easy way to get in there and clean it and not have to go through the bar.
Just because of the new non-smoking ordinance, you have to be, is it 10 feet?
I understand that that's from the main entrance and that doesn't apply to the door to the patio.
Okay.
Otherwise, yeah, you're right. That would create a interesting problem there.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Maybe Dean can answer that.
I was just saying, with
Yeah.
that in mind, we probably should tend to be maybe a little more lenient with some of these establishments, knowing that they've been, in their opinion, penalized, not my opinion, but I think maybe we should sort of take that a little bit in consideration as well, that there's probably going to be more of these coming before us in the future.
I think if you measured it, I believe you would have over 10 feet of radius around that doorway anyway.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to see that as a condition because when I looked at the ordinance, I think that it is based on the main entrance.
Main entrance, okay.
I know in the city of Manhattan that has the identical ordinance, they've applied it to within 10 feet of an entrance from an outdoor patio into a building, but we'd have to see how ours is literally spelled out. But I know in this city of Manhattan, it is enforced to any entryway into a building.
Well, I'm not going to place any idea of the clientele of the rendezvous, but I'm guessing that probably won't be anybody complaining if someone was smoking by the side door, is my guess. Or would you say there's a lot of smokers there?
Yes, I would.
Yeah, okay. So I don't think we're going to probably have too many complaints.
Any further questions of Mr. Edgar?
Well, just one, and the only reason I ask about the 1 exit is not that it matters to me, other than it's a staff recommendation that you go to 1 exit. That's what it was, it prompted my question. And if we approve this per staff recommendation, we'd be saying that would be part of our was there a reason to go to 1 exit?
The reasoning just being the complaints that we received and just to make everybody happy kind of thing, because there really isn't a necessity to have 2 exits if you don't have an occupant load over 50. And if you have 1 exit for the requirement of under 50, then I think both the complaining parties and the owner, and I think everyone can be happy with that. At least that's our idea. So that's where that came from.
And that was the purpose for my question, was of the owner to see if 1 was satisfactory based on your recommendation.
Sure.
One is satisfactory. The other thing I would point out, as far as the building code is concerned, if we had more than 2 or more than 50 people in the patio and you had a 2 exit requirement, 1 exit could still be through the building and 1 through the gate.
There.
So,
Do you have a preference on front or back exit? I mean, I know Mr. Electronics Incorporated has a preference, but do you?
I don't think it makes any difference.
Either way?
They have to be controlled either way.
Okay.
I mean, it seems to me, as far as secondary observation of it, the one on the street is probably easier to see than the one in the back. So,
You say the one on the streets is?
it would be easier for other people to monitor if they were concerned about someone coming and going.
Any other questions of Mr. Edgar? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
This is a conditional use permit. It is a public hearing. Is there anyone from the public that would like to speak to this issue? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the bench and...
I just have one other question of staff. When the Paramount outside patio came before us a couple years ago, I voted against it because there were so many issues at that time about the drinking establishments downtown, lack of control, business owners downtown upset with lack of policing and drunkenness and bottles and bodily fluids that were all over and that kind of thing. Now, it seems to me that that hasn't been such an issue of late. And I like the idea of this. Is there something that's changed? I understand there was a fire that occurred. But are the police, are the business owners downtown still as concerned with this issue as before, or?
Not as many of them and not as vocally, but the owner of the electronics of Salina would fit into that category, that there's too much intensity and density now, and by increasing this capacity, it's only going to, and one doesn't know sometimes whether it's people bringing alcohol from outside and simply consuming it in parking lots and not going into, but most of it has to do with traffic of bottles and other things exiting and being carried between establishments and left somewhere in between for somebody else to clean up. And that's why the more exits and gates and things there are, the more things need to be, more areas that need to be monitored. And so that's our point is, if it's not required for fire egress or emergency purposes, having less gates and less exit points is better just from a monitoring standpoint. It's easier to monitor. But that's where that was coming from. And so we've got on the record here, and we can count the 12 tables of 4, is simply that the plans were labeled as an occupant load of 52, and that's why the fire department commented it the way that they did, because they were interpreting an effort to have over 50 on the patio. But this happens to be the downtown area, but this is not going to be the first or last. I think this is a trend for the drinking establishments. We're going to see more outdoor patios and serving areas because of the smoking ordinance.
I agree. I think the outdoor patios definitely add a nice flavor to the entertainment district, and I applaud Mr. Graybeal for proactively engaging the smoking law. So.
I wish our weather were better so that it could be used
year-round.
We're working on it.
Yeah, somebody's working on
Put
it.
up heaters and umbrellas.
Yeah.
Any more comments?
Just one other thing. I wanted to mention the sound issue. To me, that's a non-issue. I know we haven't even discussed it, and I'm just merely bringing it up because it does bother me when that comes up. This is a commercial area. Let's keep that in mind if that ever were to come up maybe on the future. Whenever we're in commercial, I think sound and things like that are going to be a natural part of the business. Only because you mentioned it as a city concern is the only reason I'm addressing it. You know, I know occasionally we get these people who have moved downtown that kind of say, oh, they're partying too late. Well, guess what? You live in a commercial area. That's what you get. So the sound issue to me is a non-issue, just in case it does come up.
And we did not insert a map of lofts this time because there are no upper story lofts in this immediate vicinity. But that is one thing we look at with an outdoor patio, is plans for musical stages or amplified sound or things of that nature. So.
But the new McCune building project is just across the street, and not building project,
right.
But rehab project is. Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay.
But there's quite a distance and space across Santa Fe, as opposed to having a common wall or being above as you have in a loft situation.
Right.
And I don't know that that's going to be an issue.
Hope it is.
Seems like construction's kind of come to a standstill there for a while.
I think the main point of clarification, or perhaps even confusion for staff, and that's something that you can look at with the with your motion, is that we were under the misimpression that the gates were put in at the direction to meet fire code requirements, therefore being emergency exits, they should be equipped appropriately. But I think what we're hearing at this hearing is that they're not intended to be emergency exits, but rather customer convenience. So that customer convenience would not call for alarm systems and push bars. So that's something that we would need to clarify. But it does not, if you're of the belief that going from 2 to 1 and having that appropriately managed is sufficient, then we wouldn't want to equip that with emergency bar alarms, because that would be an inconvenience, not a convenience.
So neither of your two recommendations would apply?
Again, in our conversations with the fire marshal, we were of the belief that the gates were put there to comply with fire code exiting requirements, and only because of that. So that is the difference, is that the problem, the ongoing issue with the Paramount was based on the fact that the owner stood in front of you and said that he didn't want customers either entering or exiting from the alley, and that hasn't proven to be correct in the long run. In this case, you have the applicant saying that he does want the gates to be used by customers, so you need to take that into account. That explains our recommended conditions. There is our belief that there wouldn't have been any gates there except for the fire code requirements.
A building permit will be pulled, and the fire department will review this, obviously.
Yes, and that's correct. We had a situation that Mr. Ediger was also involved with. The Blind Pig, which is a bar out on South 9th Street, has an outdoor patio, and because of the close proximity of the patio with the front exit of the bar itself, they don't have any exterior gates because the distance and the numbers of people could adequately exit from the patio through the front door of the bar, and they don't have any gates in their fence area. So that's possible that would be the case here, but that will be reviewed in detail by the fire marshal.
Are we ready for action?
Yes.
Mike?
Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion that we approve application C09-4 as presented.
Second.
And that's no recommendations
With-
attached.
With no recommendations attached, that's
Okay,
correct.
everybody clear? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 7-0. Other matters.
We will be having and have scheduled a special mid-meeting, and that is a application for a planned development district for the proposed new city aquatic center, and it has some features, height setbacks, and other things that don't fit neatly within any established zoning district. So the thought was to try to customize one, and so there's a public hearing and meeting scheduled to review the features and details of the aquatic center next Wednesday at 4 o'clock.
Would that be merely a formality? Is there already letting bids for the water park?
There are plans out for bid, but there are also addendums going on. There's quite a few site utilities that are running through the site and need to be relocated, and things like those locations and easements and things like that is something we're going to try to address on the site plan with you. So actually it's still under review because of those. The water intake that takes water from the river over to the water plant actually runs through the site or near the site where the aquatic center is planned. So those are details that are still under review, and that's not a small line. So
$500,000 pool just became $15 million. That's all right.
So there are some site issues that you will need to weigh in on.
Wow.
Yeah, we'll let That will be a public hearing.
It's
and-
an advertised public hearing.
Yep.
The only non-governmental owner that is in the notification area is the Salina YMCA, so I wouldn't expect a big turnout based on that, but we did post a sign on the property so people driving by would see that, and there's a phone number on that if they want to call.
Would we be expected to take action?
Yes,
At the
you'd be
conclusion of
expected
that
to make
meeting?
a recommendation on a specific plan development district for that site and the plan, and if you have specific comments, recommendations, whatever, that's your discretion.
Okay, that's next week, Wednesday, right?
Yes,
4
instead of
o'clock.
Tuesday, it'll be a Wednesday meeting.
Okay, any other matters? We are adjourned.